So today's video, we're going to go over a couple of techniques we can use in order to resample things from our projects. So I've talked about this trick before, where you take things from your existing project and you sample them and reuse them as different types of sounds. So what I've done here is I've taken a snare for this drum beat, and we're going to see how we can abuse this snare and create different sounds from this that we could then put into our track to create different layers. So one trick we can do is we can think about using the reverbs and delays and a few other little kind of creative effects. So let's start by just putting this snare here. We're going to put this through a delay. So I'm going to try new stuff that you guys have probably got already. So I'm going to go for the Valhalla. We're going to go for the free one though. So we're going to go for we'll use the supermassive for the reverb, and we'll use the frequency echo for the delay. So we can see now, if we start to add this delay in here, we can put it at different speeds. So we could go like a dotted eighth. If you play around with this shift, you'll see that it kind of shifts up in pitch as it rings out, which can be quite cool. Got loads of feedback on it. So that's a classic kind of, if we put then a reverb after this, so we go for the Valhalla and we go for the supermassive, we can then wash this out a bit. We can play around with the amount of mix. So we can get these little snare washouts that sound like this. They can be quite cool. So you can bounce this down, so it's got a fair bit of tail on it. So let's make sure we get most of this tail in here. Let's do it to like there, for example, Shift and B, and then enter. And then we get this like little snare delay. But other things that we can do to make this sound a bit more interesting, because this is very basic, and we can start to get some interesting sounds from this as well, is by leaving this on here. What we can do is one way is to add something like a granular portal on here. So we go for that. And we can find some cool presets in here, which will give us some good results. You see here, we start to get some quite cool little sounds from it. Scrape effect. Quite nice. So there's that effect. We could use the portal, we could take that off, we could then go for something like this one, the Temperance, which is free. I still believe it's free, if I'm not mistaken. And we could get some tonal sounds out of this one, so we go through some of the presets. And we start to get some sort of tonally sounds out of that one. Play around. You can get some sounds like that, and you can play around obviously with the keys that you want to use as well. And we get different sort of tonalities from that. Different presets. There's the decay amount. We get some more long sounds like that. So you can see through this instrument, we also get some cool little sounds, or this plugin, should I say. So the other thing we can do to start making this into a cool effect as well is we can start playing around with the stretch modes here. So we can make it really long like that. Start playing around with it like that with the pitches. The other thing I really recommend doing is going into it and stretching it by pressing Alt and then dragging along here. You can make it longer like that. And then when we start to play with these, we get some interesting things going. Get some sounds like that, which can be quite nice. But then we can also play around with the stretch modes here as well. So by changing this stretch mode, we're also going to get some different vibes. So for example, if I go into the cyclic mode here, we're going to get some cool little like glitchy effect sounds like this. And we can play around with the amount that we get here, which can be quite nice as little effects. So when you got something like this, for example, we can make it quite musical by automating this, for example. So you could play this along here like this. And then what we do is on each one, we can change the key here. So we could put this one like this. And then as you see, you get the idea. You can play around with the pictures, obviously, and get different kind of like tonal sort of stabs from that. So that's another thing we can do. So the more you play with this, the more sort of like vibes you'll get. So that's just in cyclic mode, obviously. We can go into stretch mode as well. And that can give us some nice little things like this. Play now with get some washout sounds like that as well. Obviously, we can play around with the attack here, so we can get more of a whooshy sound like that. So if we go back into like cycle, play around those. Here we start to get some kind of beeps, which can be quite interesting as well. And then remember, we could stretch this out even further. We get some cool little things like that. So playing around with these, as you can see, can be really cool. And we can also use this in a kind of percussive way as well. So if we go back to like cyclic mode, for example, stretch this out a bit more right here. We can get rid of these effects on here as well. And then we can start to use this as like percussive effects. Okay, we might want to then just bounce this as well. So just bounce this quickly. Let's see what we've got here. We can see it moves a little bit off time, so we could then, what we could do is re-stretch this so it's kind of in the right place. Obviously, try our best to get it to sit on time down there somewhere. And we could Command and J that. Command B it, so it's bounced in that speed. We could play it over the beat now. See, and then we get sort of like this vibe. And now we've created another little percussive layer with our snare. And say we wanted some little drum rolls as well, then we could come back to this. Let's make it really fast, for example. So You could then bounce this. This could be a little roll thing here, for example. And then we get something like this. So you could say that's a bit long. Now we get some cool little rolls going as well with this. Okay, so as you can see, we can start to create drum shuffles, percussive patterns. We can create little droney sounds as well. So we can make these really, really long. We can really wash this sound out as well. So let's just go back to the washy sounds with this as well. Let's make this really long, for example, up to here. Let's put this one in this mode. So we go in here and put a really big reverb on here. So we can make some real kind of washout sounds out of these as well. But what we can also do with this is we could go into the tuning of it by getting another EQ. I'm going to go with the Pro EQ for this one though. So I'm going to use this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a few things like this. What we'll do is we'll make a chord out of this. So let's go here, and let's go there, and then this one can come back to like 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's to be like there, I think. Put this off for a minute. We can now turn the gains up here on all of these, like this. And then what we'll do is we'll put a tool at the end just to turn it down. It's going to be really loud. And then let's have a listen to this now. And let's remember to put the EQ or the reverb, sorry, back on here. And then another thing we can do, which is with the kilohertz, we can use this. We could go for the ring mod here. And then we could just add this here. And you see we start to get some nice sort of dark little tones, which can be cool for like washed out pads, drones, etc., as you can hear from this. So I would then go ahead like and bounce this one down, and there we go. Excellent stuff. So I've got a whole collection of sounds here now, as you can see. I've just made loads of different variations that I've got. I made some before this video, and now I've done a few in this video to show you exactly what I was doing. There's so many ways we could approach this, but one of the things to really remember is that stretching your sounds and using different stretch modes once you've stretched them as well, it's going to give you slightly different results with the sound. So have a go at playing with this, and you'll see that you can come up with some cool little musical tones, you can come up with some cool percussive tones and effects, etc. So there's all sorts of sounds we can start to create using what we've already got at our disposal. So you don't need to keep digging for samples all the time. Sometimes you can just use techniques like this to create the sounds, and that way you're always guaranteeing that those sounds are going to fit within context of your track, because they came from your track originally. So this is a technique I wanted to share with you guys today. I hope this one was interesting for you guys and you found it useful, and I'll see you on the next one.